Hello and welcome to the first edition of Politics Today in 2022, and in this programme we'll be discussing where are we in terms of Christian liberty in this year, 2022. So I'm joined today by Tim Dieppe, who's the head of policy at Christian Concern, together with David Curtin, the leader of the Heritage Party. So gentlemen, firstly, Happy New Year to you both and to your families.
Thank you.
And this is the first programme I've done for 3 weeks, so it's in the studio, so it's great to be back. I'll start off with you, David, because you've been very busy, haven't you, on the campaign trail with various by-elections. Can you share with us how that's gone and how you're really kind of gearing up to get the message that is behind the Heritage Party, one to defend our Christian heritage and our Christian values?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there were 2 by-elections last month in December. I stood actually myself in Old Sidcup and Old Bexley and Sidcup. I lived for 5 years when I was on the London Assembly, and then we had another one in North Shropshire. And then this month there's one in Southend West, so I'm going to be very busy. We've got a candidate standing there for the Heritage Party, but I think, you know, we're unique in having a Christian ethos, if you like, not being a specifically Christian party, but standing up for Christian values, especially free speech and liberty, as well as traditional family values and so on. So I think that's really, really important for this country to actually have a political party that stands for those things and is going to try to get people elected into positions of power that we can actually make laws and change the laws back to something which is good again.
Absolutely, much needed. And it's great to see you. Tim, you've been very busy with Christian Concern, including an interview recently with Talk Radio on the importance of the cross. Can you just share with us where we are in 2022 in terms of Christian freedoms and liberty?
Yeah, well, we started off the year with a fantastic win in the courts, really, which is this nurse, Mary Anua, who wore a cross, just a little sort of necklace cross. She'd worn it since her confirmation, wore it for 19 years as a nurse. And then the people where she worked started picking on her for it and telling her she couldn't wear it. And even in one instance, actually in the operating theatre with a patient on the table, she was told, you can't have that cross in here, you need to take it off now, as if it was an emergency. And it clearly is not. And people are allowed to wear in the same trust all sorts of other religious garb, hijabs and turbans and various other things, and other jewellery as well. And so the Employment Tribunal rightly ruled that it was a discriminatory case. She'd been discriminated against, she'd been harassed, she'd been unreasonably forced out of her job for this, and the cross is clearly a Christian symbol, and therefore it's a breach of religious freedom as well, discrimination, breach of religious freedom. And so she won the case, and conversation will be coming her way, we hope, very soon. So it's a significant win because there are a lot of people out there, a lot of doctors and nurses actually, who like to wear crosses, who like to wear symbols, and in other workplaces as well, who like to wear maybe a little fish or something else to show that they're a Christian and feeling conscious that that's what they want to do. And this ruling supports them and supports their right to do that in terms of in employment cases.
Yeah. And David, why is it over the last couple of decades in particular, since we turned to this new millennium, have we seen a fundamental attack on Christian freedoms? And it seems like other religions have predominance over Christian freedoms when, for example, this is or was essentially a Christian nation under our Judeo-Christian heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this has been a long time in the making. I mean, you can trace the roots of this back to the Frankfurt School in the 1920s and critical theory. And, the people who were professors and that went over to universities in America very much hated Christian society and Western civilization and wanted to try to break it down from within because they couldn't do it like with a quick revolution like they had in Russia to bring in a communist atheistic society. They wanted to do that in the West, but then the idea was to corrupt everything, and then you have the long march through the institutions, which is a well-known phrase. So this has been going on for many decades, first in education and then in business, in politics and so on. But in the last 20 years or so, I would say particularly from the time when Tony Blair came to be Prime Minister in the UK, this has accelerated. And the interesting thing about this case, Mary Anua with the NHS, is that she worked for 15 years, something like that, with no problem at all. And then suddenly, in 2015, there was a massive problem, and they tried to harass her to get rid of her cross. And even they said, crazy things like it will cause infection, which is ridiculous, because what about a watch? What about an earring? What about a wedding ring? That, they would have exactly the same medical
or
effects. Exactly. But they picked on a Christian cross, obviously because it was an attack on Christianity itself, as well as being an individual attack on her. But we have to fight back against this, and I'm so glad for Christian Concern and for Mary herself, who took a stand to say, we're not going to have this, we're going to re-establish the right to say you're a Christian and to be proud of your Christian faith.
Absolutely. Can you give us the backdrop of the story regarding Mary, this Nigerian nurse who's done a fantastic job, but has really been harassed ever since about 2014, and then that harassment increased until the stress got so bad and she was taken off clinical work and was given administrative work instead, and just demoralised. Can you just give us the context of how Christian Concern took this case up and the approach that you took to the courts?
Well, listen, Simon, we have a history of, a really long history actually, about crosses in the workplace. And people may remember Nadia Ewida, who wore a cross as a British Airways stewardess. And British Airways objected to her wearing, again, a sort of little cross that she wanted to show. And it went all the way to the court and all the way in the end to the European Court of Human Rights. And a similar case as well, Shirley Chaplin was a nurse, which again became a very high-profile case. Very similar again, a confirmation cross that she had worn for years and years and years, and nobody ever objected to it. Suddenly, the hospital was objecting to her wearing this little cross that could not, no way it could cause any infections or anything like that. Again, it went all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights at the same time as Nadia Ewida. The British government at the time, in court, argued that the cross is not a Christian symbol. Their lawyers said for the British government under David Cameron that the cross is not a Christian symbol. And it took the European Court of Human Rights and actually an ex-communist Polish judge to say, no, the cross actually is a Christian symbol. And the UK was ruled to be in breach of Article 9 of the Convention, that's freedom of religion, for the first time in its history in those cases. And that's back in 2013, that was in the European Court of Human Rights. And so here we are, sort of nearly 10 years later, and here's a similar, Mary Anua's case is very similar to Shirley Chaplin's case in terms of a nurse wearing a cross. And it seems like the courts have kind of learnt from this, and the Employment Tribunal this time accepted very clearly that the cross is a Christian symbol and that people want to wear it as part of their Christian faith and part of their Christian witness, and that there's a long history of that, and there's persecution of Christians in relation to the cross in other countries and that kind of thing. So it's a very significant sort of in principle win here, and we're very pleased that it got, we won it straight away at the Employment Tribunal rather than having to go all the way through the Court of Appeal, etc., all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights, which is what happened all that time, 10 years plus ago.
And David, it's a great victory for Mary and also for Christians across the country, but doesn't this show us the need to stand firm and to be overcomers and not to cower to the NHS authorities of, I think she was part of the Croydon NHS Trust, but to stand her ground, and that's what she's done. She's an overcomer. She knows that the cross means so much to her because it's an expression of her Christian faith and wants to wear it in the workplace. How important is it that others follow in Mary's footsteps by just standing firm on their principles and not giving in to these pressures, whether they're multi-faith pressures or whether they're kind of militant secularist ideas, to just be able to show a Christian symbol such as the cross?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, she's a trailblazer here, and she's won this case, and she could have just been demoralised and given up. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to do, to say, okay, well, I'm going to take off my cross. But she didn't. She carried on wearing it, and they came and kept on attacking her. But even though that happened, she still continued to wear the Christian cross because she thought it's the right thing to do. She can't back down. And the Bible says to us, do not be afraid of the gospel. Do not be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it tells us many, many times to be bold, and don't back down. Joshua, for example, Joshua chapter 1 is a scripture that gives me great strength a lot of the time in what I'm doing in politics. And she is just a nurse, if you like. She's in her 60s. She's just a normal person. But if she can stand up, anybody can. I used to be a very shy teenager. I can't believe what I'm doing now. But if I can stand up and say this, I think anyone can, because people don't know, my background and what I was like 30 years ago. But, I think anybody can. And now we've got examples, people who've stuck their heads above the parapet to say, we're going to stand up for liberty, in general, but the right to, proclaim the gospel, to show the love of Christ, the love of Jesus, to mention the name of Jesus in what's supposed to be a Christian country. I mean, it's so ridiculous that you've got people attacking Christianity in a Christian country, and if we don't stand up, we're going to lose that. We're going to lose our freedom. We're going to lose our liberty. So we have to stand up, and we need all the churches, we've got millions of Christians in this country. If we all stand up together, in love, in peace, but assertively, in boldness, then we can win back, our right to freedom and liberty, and the sort of religious tolerance that actually came in through Christian politicians and so on a couple of hundred years ago.
Absolutely. And Tim, why is the cross deemed to be offensive? We know from Scripture that it says that Jesus is life to those who believe him, but for those that don't, it's the Roma of death.
Yes, I mean, is it really offensive? I mean, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, they didn't claim it was offensive, right? Nobody claimed it was offensive in this case. They just claimed it was contrary to policy or an infection risk or whatever. And those claims didn't stack up because they were allowing similar pieces of jewellery or other items, wearing a tie, whatever, that have more risk, if anything. And so it didn't really stack up. But why did they pick on the cross in the first place? And you've got to ask that question. It does look like it was discrimination against Christianity, and in fact, one of the judges did sort of accept that in this employment tribunal, and still thought that was the case, whereas some of the others didn't. So it's a controversial point that, but it does look that way when they pick on the cross, the Christian with a little cross, and not other people wearing much bigger and greater things that are also symbols of other religions.
And David, do you think that the success of Mary Honour's case, particularly her dismissal from a Croydon NHS trust on the grounds of harassment, victimisation, direct and indirect discrimination and unfair dismissal, would give a warning signal to other institutions, whether it's the NHS or whether it's the private workplace or whether it's in the civil service, that these bodies can't behave in this way and discriminate against someone just because they're a Christian and just because they wear a cross?
Yeah, well, absolutely, because this sets a precedent. So this is now case law. And so any other case that's brought before the courts would have to refer back to this case, because that's now, common law, if you like. So it does set a warning, do not discriminate against Christians. And, particularly when in the same trusts, Mary has said, I think, that people came in wearing hijabs. Yep. You can wear a turban, you can wear bangles, but then you're not allowed to wear a Christian cross. Well, you are actually, but they tried to make her believe that she couldn't and harassed her to do that. So this does send a warning signal that this actually is discrimination, and you must not discriminate against Christians, And it's shocking that this has gone on in our country, but now we have that precedent in law, and that's very good.
And do you see a change of atmosphere this year, Tim, regarding Christian freedoms in this country, where we saw previously from years past a fundamental attack on Christianity, particularly by Tony Blair's government in the Labour Party, and then followed on by David Cameron and others who should know better. But do you see a sea change in terms of the attitudes of the courts, the attitude of the media? Because a lot of our tabloid press, including the broadsheets as well, have taken these issues very, very seriously.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Mary's case got reported in all the mainstream media, all the newspapers all picked up on it. And again, she won just in the very first round of the court as well. And so, that is positive, and it is encouraging to see that, and people sympathising with her generally as well. I mean, most, all the commentators I've seen have basically sympathised. Yes, the NHS shouldn't have discriminated against her in this way as well, and that was unreasonable, and the courts reached the right decision here. And we're going to come on to talk about the Ashers as well, which is another important victory in these things. And just before Christmas, we had Harry Miller, which is about hate incidents, actually non-crime hate incidents, won a significant victory against the police recording those. So I think there is a bit of a shift, and certainly, or a bit of a pushback, put it that way, against some of these anti-Christian, anti-freedom things that have been going on.
Absolutely. And how important is it, for example, Christian parliamentarians, and sadly there are not many of them in Parliament, to actually stand up on the truth and defend women like Mary and others who are being discriminated against for wearing a cross?
Well, I'd like to see more in Parliament. And, the trouble with what we have at the moment is that you've got basically a two-party system, or if you include the SNP, three main parties, and they are essentially quite woke. They're not generally going to stand up for Christian values from the top of the party, and then the MPs get whipped into a certain position. So the number of Christian MPs who are speaking out, I think, is quite sadly very low, and I think we need to see more of them. I mean, good for the ones that do speak out on some issues at some point. I mean, I think of Carla Lockhart, for example, and for the DUP. I mean, she's one that comes to mind that actually stands up for Christian values in certain settings. But we need more of that. But I think what we need is a change of parties. It's one of the reasons I started the Heritage Party, because I think the ones that we've got are almost irredeemable now, because they're just gone so far down the anti-Christian roads. And there are some good ones within that, but it's very, very hard for them to speak out in those institutions. Labour, what calls itself Conservative but isn't anymore, SNP, Lib Dem, etc., that we need something new, because the system's almost broken with the parties that we've got.
Absolutely. And Tim, you mentioned the Asher Baker case. Now, this is another big victory, as the European Court for Human Rights said that Gareth Lee's case against the bakery that refused to make him a cake that supported gay marriage has been rejected by the European Court for Human Rights. How much of this is also a big ruling in terms of Christian freedom, and also one of conscience as well?
Well, it's a very significant case, and credit to the Christian Institute for bringing it and taking it on. Mr. Lee had been served at the bakers before, and they had no objection to serving him as a person. But what they did object to was a cake with a particular message on it, and they didn't want to support a message which they disagreed with. And so it's kind of the opposite of freedom of speech. It's about compelled speech. And they were saying we shouldn't be compelled to produce something with a message with which we disagree. And many people have pointed out that's a very reasonable position to take. You wouldn't want to force a Muslim to produce something with a cartoon of Muhammad on it. That'd be unreasonable as well. And so it did go all the way to the Supreme Court here in this country, and the Supreme Court for once saw sense and ruled, yes, they shouldn't have compelled speech. It wasn't about the person, it was about the message. And so they weren't discriminating against the person at all. They were just saying, we don't want to promote this message. And no printer should have to print a message with which they disagree, or promote something with which they disagree. If they don't like climate change, they shouldn't have to promote something that says climate change is the biggest problem. If they do like climate change, they shouldn't have to promote something that says we don't agree with climate change. It's all that kind of stuff about compelled speech. And so it's a very significant thing. Lee tried to take it again to the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights has now declined it and said it doesn't really go into their remit. And therefore the judgment of the Supreme Court stands, and that is the end of the matter. And it's great that that judgment stands as it is, and that people can turn down business that involves a message with which they disagree.
And I see in the news today, as a recording of this programme, that the Pope has come out against cancel culture, and the Asher Bakery case is definitely linked to this cancel culture. If you don't accept my liberal viewpoint, then I'm going to try and cancel you. And this is a great danger to not only freedom of speech, but also academic freedom of expression, and also affects people in the entertainment industry, in business as well. How important is it that we push back against these people that are pushing for cancel culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cancel culture is terrible, and it started years and years ago. It's not just Christians who are affected; it's people who would have conservative or traditional values, and people like Jordan Peterson, for example, cancelled at Cambridge University, and even now people who don't, like J.K. Rowling, cancelled for having certain opinions on certain things, and that's been in the news recently. So, the Ashes Bakery case is a really important case because, again, as Tim said, we can't have compelled speech. And what I find shocking about that case as well is the Equalities Commission of Northern Ireland spent £250,000 helping to bring the case, which is, this is a government quango, so this is essentially taxpayers' money being used, in what's a civil case. So, we got to end cancel culture, but you look into it and you see that the state is actually paying in this case and in some other cases, either directly or indirectly, for cancel culture and to silence certain people. And this is absolutely wrong. And we need to talk about these things, call it out when it's happening, and make sure there's no more state money going into this, and then no more laws are passed to entrench cancel culture. Indeed, we need the opposite. We need to repeal the laws that give people, free rein to try to cancel people.
Yeah. And Tim, what would you say the biggest challenge facing Christian Concern in 2022 is? Because obviously this year started off very well with winning two big high-profile cases that have supported the Christian cause.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very concerned about free speech in relation to the whole subject of what's called conversion therapy. I think they're saying that under 18s aren't allowed to talk or can't consent to these kind of conversations. And I think that's a real issue, and I think it'll cause a problem for the church. But I'm encouraged because there's been a real backlash to it. And 2,700 pastors signed an open letter to the government about it. The government's been forced to extend the consultation. And I think they've been very surprised at the level of criticism of the government proposals that's come out. So that's a big battle to fight, and it's all to play for in the next few months.
And David, as being leader of the Heritage Party and forming a new party is not easy. It's not easy to get the PR and the media attention so that people know who you are and what you do. But what would you say your challenges are as a political party actually facing these issues head on in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got a fantastic manifesto and it's out there on our website. But, my biggest challenge is to get known because, you have the mainstream media outlets, if you like, they don't want to have me on. They will either ridicule you or they will ignore you when they're both ways of trying to do you down. I think, if this were a level playing field, if we stand in an election, you would get equal time with all the other candidates. But, for example, in the elections that just went in December, the big established parties, they get invited onto television shows, they get invited on the debates, but they do this trick where they deem us to be a minor party and then they don't invite us on. So that's really unfair, if you like. So our biggest challenge is to get out. We obviously need to raise finances, we need to get more members, we need more candidates, we need more support and activists so that we're able to fight elections. And we're building a team for the local elections coming up in May, so that'll be good.
Yeah, and don't forget, you got a platform on Politics Today.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And Tim, as we, it's always a new opportunity when we have a start of a new year. But what role can our Christian viewers play in supporting the incredible work being done by Christian Concern to defend our freedoms? And what role can they personally play to protect our cherished values that have been handed down from one generation to the next?
Yeah, well, I would just endorse what David was saying about stand up and don't back down on things, and don't let yourself be trodden over or discriminated against, or if there's something going on in your school, take it up with the teacher, as I've done recently with something. And if you need advice, call us and get onto us, and we'll come and help you. Or something going on in your workplace, take it up, stand up. and make a difference about it. Be prepared to stand up, write to your MP about the issues that are around us, make them aware that there are people who are really concerned about what's happening with cancel culture and ways in which Christians are being discriminated against, and just promote and talk about the stories that we put out on our weekly newsletter and on social media and so on. All of that is really, really helpful, and we just need to change the culture by being vocal and not being afraid to say what we think and stand up for what we think and believe.
And David, how important is it that our viewers speak up on these issues? That if they're in a situation where they're like Mary, who wears a cross because it's a sign of her devotion to Jesus, how can they stand up against being discriminated against and victimised for being a Christian in the workplace? It's usually government workplaces, whether it's the NHS or the civil service or anything else like that.
Yeah, it's so important, and it's very difficult to do that, but, stick your head above the parapet, speak out, because, God will be with you if you speak out. You might get shot down, but, it's important to do this because we're in a fight for the kingdom of God, for this country, and for the gospel. So, if you don't speak out, we're not here to keep our tongues silent. We're not here to be a light that is under a bushel. We're here to be salt and light in the world. So go for it, speak out, be bold, and I'm sure God will bless you and honour you.
Absolutely. And Tim, we're coming towards the end of the programme, so I've only got a few minutes left. But can you describe the very important role that Christian Concern plays, and that is engaging with our politicians, but also engaging with our mainstream media? Because if it wasn't for Christian Concern and also the Christian Legal Centre, as well as the Christian Institute, actually facing media and giving the journalists the news stories in our papers so that they can run, all of this stuff would be horrendous, wouldn't it?
Yes, well, we have a great media team, and I'm very pleased because we've had a number of very high-profile headlines, including like the one about the churches. We won this fantastic case against church closures last year. A huge headline around that. Bernard Randall as well, a huge headline around him being sacked from school for preaching a sermon saying you should be free to disagree with some of this ideology that's going on there. So yes, we're trying to basically be a voice for the church and a voice for Jesus in politics, in media, and in the public square, and what a privilege it is, and we're getting that message out, and more people are receptive to it. So it's really encouraging to see that, and great to see a Christian perspective represented in the media when we get it, and love doing it.
And how important is it that we read stories like Mary, the nurse from Croydon, and other stories that we see that effectively touch on Christian freedoms?
Yeah, it's really important because it's encouraging. When you see someone who's fought in a battle like this, not in the past, not like 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, but right now, in this country, in this year, it's so encouraging to see, we are having victories here, and it's not just going one way. I think there is, the globalists, if you like, want to do us down, but we're fighting back, and it's great, and it's encouraging to see.
Excellent. So David, Tim, thank you so much for being my guest on today's Politics Today, and I want to thank you for watching this program today. We have to understand that our Christian freedoms are precious, and they are vital for our future democracy and liberty in this country. And this is why we need to pray for brave and courageous people like Mary, who took the NHS to court over her unfair dismissal and discrimination. And I think this is a lesson for us all to be overcomers and not to give up, and to continue to fight for our faith in this country, because if we don't, consequences could be serious. So thank you for watching this Politics Today.